The message for this Mother's Day weekend is called The Lesson of Love. And by the way, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. I would like to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, known as the Love chapter. Let me start with just the first few verses. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give my body over to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Think about when you were a small child. What words did you have trouble with, had a hard time pronouncing? Maybe it was names. Did you learn how to pronounce something the wrong way and you didn't even know it was the wrong way until you were much older? Maybe even as an adult? For some reason, when I was a kid, little boy, I called myself Pomping when I was little. I guess maybe I had trouble saying Paul Mark, which is what I was called in those days. You know, I still get called that from time to time, Pomping. That's kind of strange, isn't it? But that's how I pronounced it. We all want to be able to speak clearly and be understood. We may even aspire to speak with great eloquence. But if we don't have love, it's like the huge gong on that old show, The Gong Show. Doesn't sound very good, not very pleasant. Every generation seems to have its fantasy heroes, from Merlin the magician to Gandalf of the Lord of the Rings, or to anime cartoons. But mind power, prophetic insight, or incredible faith don't mean anything if it is not bathed in love. So if we speak well, but don't have love, it doesn't mean anything. If we can fathom mysteries, but don't have love, it doesn't mean anything. You know, kids like to wear superhero costumes. They want to think about having superpowers. They're willing to wear these pajama-like outfits out in public with this hope that maybe they could fly or destroy monsters. They may even want to be the kind of heroes that could feed the world or cure diseases or even die for a great cause. But if love is not in the mix, it's meaningless. Let's go on. Verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Now, this is where moms come in. You see, love isn't, according to the Apostle Paul, flashy or exotic. It's simple. And at the same time, it's hard work. Most moms set an example of love that is in the little things. Being patient with children or spouses when they are difficult. Kind when someone is hurting. Not boasting, but rather seeing the best in others. Reserving anger for when it's appropriate. Not hanging on to a long list of misdeeds. Now, moms aren't doormats. They need to speak up and speak out. Injustice needs to be corrected. They aren't happy when evil reigns, but when truth is told, there is much rejoicing. Protecting others takes tenacity, strength, and hopefulness. And I think these are the characteristics of the moms out there doing their best for their families. Verse 8, love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, Then I shall be fully known. I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Love wins. God's love for us and God's love in us is what remains. There are all kinds of special spiritual powers and gifts, but what remains in eternity is love. In heaven, you won't need a prophet because the future is not a mystery. You won't need knowledge because you won't be able to learn more than you already know because you are complete. Maturing won't be needed because there isn't a need to grow up. You won't see yourself as if in a mirror, but you will see yourself fully and clearly because God will reveal it all and will himself be fully understood. So what was the situation that Paul, the apostle, was dealing with to bring about this very poetic vision of love that's recorded in 1 Corinthians chapter 13? Well, he was dealing with a church body that was being immature. He needed to address both unity and diversity in the body. In the previous chapter, chapter 12, starting in verse 12, it says this: just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its parts are forming one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, and this is where Paul gets kind of comical, if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, imagine that. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. He goes on to say, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now the Corinthian church had become competitive with one another because they looked at the gifts in the church and figured that some things were simply more important than others. And so Paul had to remind them in verse 27 of chapter 12, now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. A part of the body, an important member of the family. It's like a parent telling their children, I love you all equally. You are all special to me. So quit fighting and get along. Paul asks the people in verse 29 to 31, are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts. They didn't all have the same gifts, but all the gifts were important. And he finishes chapter 12 by saying, and yet I will show you the most excellent way. And that's where we get chapter 13, the love chapter. Now the love chapter is sandwiched between, obviously, 12 and 14. And in 14, Paul gets more specific. He had to address the use of spiritual gifts. He focuses in on the gift of tongues, a type of gift that brings some confusion yet today. The gift of ecstatic utterance, when caught up in worship, can be meaningful to the one expressing joy and also to others. But it can also be kind of like hearing a song where the tune is great, but you have no idea what the words are. It can be confusing. There's even a list of misunderstood songs that people typically go around singing the lyrics that are not actually the words that the original writer had. Paul actually says he favors prophecy because the words of prophecy are so clear that the hearer simply needs to listen and take heed of them. It's not like hearing a foreign language, but if someone can interpret the meaning of the expression of tongues, then it has its place too. Music of many kinds touches us deeply. How wonderful it is when both the way a song sounds and the depth of what it speaks to our hearts are perfectly in sync. Paul's desire for the Corinthians was that their worship would be so well crafted that if unbelievers came in, they would say, God is really among you, instead of seeing things as chaos. And in the Corinthian church, it had become chaotic and competitive. So Paul then describes what good order in worship is like in verse 26 when he says, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up." Much like the Quaker way of waiting and speaking when led by the Spirit, the meaning of the message should be pondered and weighed. Wise leaders will consider the words to hear if a message really is from God. The sense of order is not meant to be rigidity, but rather a spacious invitation to be heard and to be known. This is what chapter 13 does. It's what it gets to the heart of. It's also what I kind of think my mom was trying to get through to me as a young boy. Raised in a church, and I know that's not everyone's experience, but how to think about what's really important. Things like, don't just immediately accept someone's words, but compare it to Scripture. Check it out and ask the Spirit to give insight. Listen respectfully. Don't think you have all the answers. Respect those who have lived life longer and had more experience. And Jesus is the center. Jesus shows us the truest way to love and be loved. So focus your full attention on Jesus so that you will be able to identify love when it is real and also be able to spot the counterfeits. Yes, it truly is the most excellent way. God bless you all.